Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is just a quick update on what is happening regarding the SADC decision on Zimbabwe's elections. As we know, on the 4th of November, SADC heads were supposed to meet in Angola and to tell Zimbabwe that the elections were false. And therefore, then the Zimbabwe government, the Zanu PF government, has no legitimacy. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. All the the heads of state said was they acknowledge the SADC election observer team report, which condemned the election process in August as flawed and illegal. As I said before, for SADC to sweep that report under the carpet and pretend it didn't happen would be very damaging to SADC itself. Because what's the point of SADC sending election observers? And when those election observers turn around and say, this election has failed to meet SADC's own guidelines and principles in democratic elections, and has failed to live to Zimbabwe's own constitution and electoral laws. And then SADC still do nothing about it. So it is a really acid test for SADC itself. Can they live? Can they, as a regional organization, stand up to their own standards and guidelines and saying to one of their own members, you have got to meet them? So it is tragic if they were to sweep it under the carpet. So far, we're told that SADC was going to do something about it. There are reports there. This article there is quoting somebody in Gaborone, our correspondent in Gaborone, saying that tomorrow, the SADC panel of elders, led by former president of Tanzania, Kikwete, will be arriving in Zimbabwe with the view of telling Zanu PF that those elections were false and there needs to be a way forward. I'll quickly repeat that according to Chamisa, C, they would want SADC to supervise a rerun of the election in 3 or 6 months' time. This is not a viable proposition. The elections, Zanu PF has been able to rig elections ever since the country's independence. This is a deeply entrenched, flawed system. And to gloss over it and just hold fresh elections will only be kicking the can down the road. We need democratic reforms to be implemented as proposed in the 2008 to 2013 Global Political Agreement, which led to the formation of the GNU. And unfortunately, the GNU failed to implement even one meaningful reform, and hence we are where we are. So CCC's proposal of fresh elections in 3 or 6 months' time it's just a nonsense. Should be dismissed with the contempt it rightly deserves. The other alternative is another GNU in which Zanu PF and CCC will be once again asked to implement the democratic reforms. Personally, I do not think that GNU will achieve anything. If the last one failed to achieve anything, and it was the same individuals who were in that GNU, I don't see what has changed. Zanu PF is determined to stay in power and will therefore not be interested in implementing any reforms. MDC in the last GNU proved to be corrupt and incompetent and failed to implement even one meaningful reform. The same individuals are now in CCC. They haven't changed. They're still corrupt. They're still incompetent. So to expect that somehow they will implement reforms is naive, to say the least. At best, they will implement some reforms, but not all of the democratic reforms. So we'll end up with a half-baked cake here, at best. And God knows if we are ever going to get another chance to implement the full reforms. So this is not a solution at all. A third solution, which some people have proposed, is that we should have a National Transition Authority composed of a third of Zanu PF, a third of CCC, and a third of technocrats. Personally, I think we are just compromising ourselves here. We have rejected a GNU composed of half CCC, half MDC, or CCC or Zanu PF on the grounds that they failed to implement the reforms. Indeed, I can even go to the extent of saying they are part of this problem. They cannot be part of the solution. So getting 2/3 of the problem back into the National Transition Authority is a compromise which is meant to appease the two respective parties and their leaders, but at the expense of getting reforms and getting the country out of this mess. And I don't think that National Transition Authority will do any better than the GNU. I think the only viable solution for Zimbabwe is a National Transition Authority composed of entirely technocrats, people who will implement the democratic reforms to make sure that the country gets out of this cycle of rigged elections. Yes, I cannot dismiss or pretend that Zanu PF would not like that. And more importantly, that Zanu PF will do everything in its power. And let's face it, they have control of all the security services, the police, the army, the CIO, prison services, the judiciary, all the key institutions, and they can make the country ungovernable. But I think that is the only viable solution. And in this particular case, it will take a lot of courage and resolve to face Zanu PF and say, no, you cannot hold the country to ransom, because that is exactly what they're doing, holding the country to ransom. Zanu PF cannot hold the country to ransom anymore. Indeed, they have been holding the country to ransom all along, because even the 1980 elections themselves, it is common knowledge that Zanu PF made it very clear that if the party does not win the election, the Bush war would continue. The people voted to end the Bush war. You can't pretend that was a free, fair, and credible election. Zanu PF was using the gun that it used to fight the war of liberation, and now was turning it around and pointing it at the people, telling them in no uncertain terms that if Zanu PF does not get what it wants, the war would continue. And if you look at the last 43 years, whenever Zanu PF felt its hold on power threatened, it has used violence. Notably, the 2008 elections themselves. The runoff was dubbed Operation Mavotera Papi, which was basically Zanu PF mobilizing the army, the CIO, the police, the war veterans, its own party militia, to punish the people who having rejected the party and Robert Mugabe in the March election. And ironically, or maybe not so surprising, the men who were behind Operation Mavotera Papi are today the president and vice president of the country. And so the threat of violence is still there. But I think it is also high time that the country realize that where we are going is disastrous. The people ourselves must stand up and say, this is what we want. And I think what we want is the full implementation of the democratic reforms to ensure that elections are free, fair, and credible. And the only sure way of getting that done is having a national transitional authority of technocrats, with both Zanu PF and CCC kept well out of it. In Shona, we've got a saying that Kana wadya gudo, chidya gono, which means if you're forced to eat a baboon, for whatever reason, then at least have the common sense to pick the fit, strong male one, and not some sickly member of the troop. We need to get out of this mess. There cannot be any doubt about it. And I think SADC itself, SADC leaders themselves, realize that Zimbabwe, as long as Zimbabwe remains a failed state, the whole region stability is under threat. I think it is high time the SADC leaders themselves take a firm stand on that one. And look for a viable solution. Not just any solution, a viable solution. And I believe a national transition authority composed entirely of technocrats is the only viable solution. We'll have to wait to see if this panel of elders arrive tomorrow. And we understand that on the 19th of November, we can expect SADC leaders themselves to be in Zimbabwe on the same mission to resolve this issue of the rigged elections. So I think we are all holding our breath. Let's see whether this advanced party of panel of elders arrive tomorrow. I am waiting together with you, together with the whole nation. Zimbabwe needs to get out of this mess. That is the truth. That is what the country needs to move forward. Am I hopeful that this is going to happen? I'm not so sure. Am I hopeful that even if it does happen, SADC has got the guts to bite the bullet and go the full hog, have a national transitional authority composed entirely of technocrats? I'm even more doubtful of that. But at least, whatever decision they make, they should know that that is the only viable solution. They cannot say they didn't know that. And more importantly, I think the people of Zimbabwe themselves should know that is the only viable solution. They cannot say they didn't know that. We cannot keep on going round and round in circles on this matter. I think the resolution of this matter is key. It will determine what Zimbabwe is going to be. Whether we get out of this mess or we keep going round and round in circles. So yes, I'll be giving you an update tomorrow, particularly if the advanced party of elders does arrive, because that will be good news and well worth reporting. So with that, thank you very much for listening and have a good day.